causing the events of 1st of August 2018, where hooligans unleashed and provoked terror and violence in the city center, supposedly demanding the release of the election results barely 24 hours after voting. In fact, it was just we concluded the elections, the voting, on the 31st of July, if you recall. The next day, before even the votes were being counted, they were already demanding that the votes were late. Now, Zimbabweans must have the last laugh. The emperor has no clothes. They just ended elections in Zimbabwe by all standards have turned in USA, by all standards have turned into a circus, from allegations of votes fraud to unbridled vote counts, leading to a weeks-long stalemate before election results could be announced, despite there being a clear winner, Mr. Joe Biden. To add salt to injury, the incumbent president, who is Mr. Nichols' boss, outgoing President Donald Trump, famed for calling all Africans and black peoples as assholes, has refused flatly to recognize the election outcome, vowing to remain president. This undemocratic agenda has found favor in his Secretary of State and Chief Diplomat, Mr. Mike Pompeo, who has laughably vowed that there is going to be a transition to a second Trump administration at a time when the president-elect Joe Biden has put in place a transitional team that is being rebuffed by the incumbent and supported by his wife and children. As you are aware, President Trump is refusing to arrange a transition and transfer of power to the president-elect Joe Biden. And we find this quite unusual. We are living in very interesting times, and interesting times lie ahead indeed. The million-dollar question for African Zimbabweans in particular is America the right tutor of global democracy? If yes, what lessons do we learn from the circus currently unfolding? The answer is that we have nothing to learn from them on elections and respecting the will of the majority. The Trump administration is indeed a threat to democracy in the global superpower and must be stopped. In all the foregoing, we are, however, surprised by the silence of the United Nations, the European Union, and their allies we have sought to prefect us on our electoral systems. This silence is unquestionable, unexplainable, unjustifiable, and unfair, more so coming at a time the USA has been marred by violence between Trump's hooligans and Mr. Biden's supporters. Our heart pours out to Black Americans who have been on the receiving end of all this violence. We applaud President E.D. Mnangagwa, President Ramaphosa, among many African leaders who have congratulated President-elect Joe Biden. That means we have pronounced ourselves on the election, and we look forward to Mr. Brian Nichols' boss, Donald Trump, to do the right thing, acknowledge defeat, and prepare to vacate the White House on the 20th of January, 2021. Zanu-Pf kindly reminds the president-elect, Mr. Joe Biden, that as he prepares to become the sheriff at the White House, Zimbabwean people from all walks of life, minus a few clique of puppet gangsters in our opposition that was created by former President Blair and Bush, Zimbabweans are calling for him, Joe Biden, to do the right thing, to lift sanctions on Zimbabwe unconditionally. Zimbabwe is aware that he was, and I'll come to it in a moment, he was one of the senators who co-sponsored ZEDERA, which is now the sanctions law against Zimbabwe and its people. As we congratulate him on his victory, we remind him and implore him to delete ZEDERA from their statute book and allow our two peoples, Zimbabweans and Americans, to engage and relate freely as peoples of the free world without being burdened by the albatross and the yoke of sanctions. Zanu-Pf implores the President-elect Joe Biden to realize that there is more to benefit from mutual and cordial relations between Zimbabwe and United States of America. We have more to benefit from unbridled hostility. We wish to inform the President-elect that our President, Comrade D.D. Mnangagwa, and his government are seeking to close the hostility chapter of the past, bury it, and restore factory settings through the engagement and re-engagement policy. Yes, we might have differences, and will continue to have differences, but leadership is about sitting down on the progressive table of soberness and resolve our differences than relate to each other through threats, Twitter rants, and nefarious COVID operations. We reiterate that the Minister of Foreign Affairs remarks that Zimbabweans and Americans wish is to be allowed to engage and explore business opportunities together, and that Zimbabwe is not hostile to the USA, although over the past years, the USA has been hostile to Zimbabwe. I want just to underscore something about democracy in America and our relationship to ourselves. Those of you who are young will not know that Black Americans gained their right to vote in 1964. And after a decade, long nationwide protests and peaceful demonstrations mounted and coordinated by the rights movement led by Dr. Luther King Jr. I must say it cost Dr. Martin Luther King his life when he was gunned down by an assassin's bullet. Up to that point, the American governance system did not regard Black Americans as human beings, worthy of the right to vote, let alone the protection of basic human rights. There was then widespread desegregation and apartheid against the Black population. In our case, we won the right to vote and enjoyment of basic human rights in 1980, after more than 16 years of protracted armed struggle against colonialism and imperialism. Our freedom, our independence, and the human rights we enjoy today did not come on a platter. Zanu-Pf is recalling this history in order to dissuade those of our compatriots who think that the USA is the oracle of democracy and human rights, and who make beeline journeys to these foreign capitals, cap in hand, for lessons on democracy and good governance. The recent violent killings of Blacks in the USA, giving rise to the Black Lives Matter movement, should be a wake-up call to all of us that we have nothing to learn from these societies. We should chart our own development path in all spheres of human endeavor, culturally, economically, politically, and socially. And we should do so without looking for role models which are non-existent. The second comment I want to make about the American electoral system is that it is complex, probably reflecting institutionalization of vested interests. It's not based on one man, one vote. So it's not so democratic after all. A presidential candidate in the USA electoral system does not need to garner popular vote for him to win an election, if you didn't know. As a matter of fact, in the 2016 presidential election, President Trump did not win the popular vote, but he won the election. It sounds an enigma. However, the person who won the popular vote in that election was Hillary Clinton. However, in this election, President-elect Joe Biden has won the election as well as garnering a popular mandate. We should make that clear. We also want the Zanu-Pf to recall, as I've already alluded to earlier, that the US sanctions law, the so-called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZIDERA, was introduced by Senators Bill Frist, a Republican from Tennessee, and Ross Feingold, a Democrat from Wisconsin, on 8th March 2001. And Senators Frist, Jesse Holmes, Republican from North Carolina, and Hillary Clinton, a Democrat from New York, and Joseph Biden, the presidential elect, a Democrat from Delaware, sponsored the legislation which was passed by the Senate on the 1st of August 2001, in the House of the Representatives on 4th December 2001, and was signed into law by the then Republican President George Bush Jr. on 21st December 2001. It is this sanctions law that has prevented Zimbabwe to access credit from the African Development Bank, where we used to get development finance, from the IMF, where we used and we should be entitled to get balance of payment support, and from the World Bank, where we used to get infrastructure financing, and through its subsidiary IFC, private sector supported investment. I wanted to point out that we are a shareholder in the World Bank, in the IMF, and in the African Development Bank, but we've not enjoyed our benefits as shareholder for the past 20 years. From this historical narration, the election of Joe Biden may mean more of the same for Zimbabwe, but we wanted to believe that a lot of water has gone under the bridge. ZIDERA was passed primarily to stop and reverse the land redistribution program and effect regime change. But I wanted to thank Zimbabweans for remaining resolute, and we have demonstrated stamina, resilience, and single-minded of purpose, unity in fulfilling the objectives of the War of Liberation. As His Excellency Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa has stated repeatedly, as Zimbabweans, we have been reunited with our soil, and there is no going back. Our unity as a people has been key in withstanding the sanctions law and the machinations of the enemy. Now, having said all this, and something that we have already mentioned, we are urging our Minister of Foreign Affairs to intensify and engage immediately the incoming USA, Biden, and Harris administration and bring to their attention the stark realities that are prevailing today. To target sanctions to target economic pillars of the economy like they did, like they continue to do, fertilizer companies, our banks, chief executives of giant economic pillars in our society, is not promoting democracy. When you target sanctions against Complex, which is a manufacturer of fertilizer, I don't see in what way you can argue that you are promoting democracy or promoting human rights. In fact, on the contrary, it is clear that the sanctions were intended to disable the system from supporting agriculture in general, but the new black farmers in particular. The sanctions' purpose was to render the land reform a failure. It is clear that the intentions was to cripple the Zimbabwean economy, which they've done, but we remain standing. Now, our minister must also bring to the attention of the new administration that a regime change agenda will not succeed. Right now, the only justification they provide is punitive measures against the people of Zimbabwe. It is a fact that the sanctions have hurt the generality of Zimbabwean people and must go. He must also bring to the attention of the American system that putting on the sanctions list children who don't even know what is happening does not appear to be in line with the value systems of the United States governance system, which they tout and propagate to the rest of the world. When you target children who are 9 years, 11 years, 13 years, and you put them on the sanctions list, it's inhuman and contrary to international human rights instruments. Children need their protection, whatever the faults of their fathers or mothers. They still require and are entitled to the protection of everybody, including the United States government. The minister also needs to point out to President-elect that sanctions against Zimbabwe are illegal under international law and should be lifted unconditionally. I cannot conclude my comments on the USA presidential election without commenting, which I've already done so before, on the allegations coming from the horse's mouth about the USA electoral system. If you take what President Trump is saying about his system, he's basically saying the USA electoral system is rotten to the core. That basically is what he's saying. And we have noted as Zanu-Pf over the years, the opposition MDC, founded and funded by the Western allies, the USA included, have always been instructed and directed that when they lose the elections, they must never concede defeat. And this is what we have gone through in the past 20 years. An opposition which does not concede defeat, which does not accept the outcome of any election, including the 2018 elections, even after going to the highest court in the land, without the V11s. Amid all this hullabaloo, why the deafening silence from our esteemed guest, the US ambassador to Zimbabwe? Why is he not lecturing us about how rotten the US electoral system is? Its shortcomings now that the cat has been let out of the bag. We would want and would have expected Ambassador Brian Nichols to have been telling us straight from the horse's mouth the shortcomings of the electoral system in the United States. Why is he so silent now? That concludes my report on the electoral system of the United States. Let me Now, I want to applaud our president for the time he took to go and commission Marwanyati Dam in Boera district in Manicaland on Wednesday, the 11th November 2020. This is an economic milestone which His Excellency has marked, not just for Boera, but also for Manicaland. Please take note that both ourselves come from Manicaland. Yeah, true. So we have a vested interest in the commissioning of this dam. He comes from Boera actually.
In the same Ward 6, where the dam was.
In Ward 6. So, but I want to make this point that it is a game changer to the economy of Boera and of Manicaland. This dam has the capacity to open up to irrigation 1,250 hectares. And once again, we thank the president for completing the dam, and also we urge the relevant ministries to come up with an irrigation plan to open up the 1,250 hectares to irrigation. And when doing so, we urge them to consult local communities so that they also put their input into the formulation of that plan. And we prefer that this is done sooner rather than later. We also urge the Ministry of Environment and Tourism to formulate a special plan for the development of tourism and fisheries industries, as well as the preservation of the catchment area which feeds into this dam. As I've said, the construction of this dam is a game changer to the economy of Boera, which, as some of you who know it, is a semi-arid district. Not much cropping has been going on there. It has been mostly livestock, goats, sheep, and cattle, but very little by way of cropping. Of course, we also would also appeal that we have a presidential input scheme for groundnuts. Boera is famous for growing groundnuts, a very important sector indeed in terms of confectionery and other utilities. So we would also urge the government to consider putting in place a presidential input scheme on groundnuts, in the same way that His Excellency is now in place a presidential input scheme on maize, small grains, cotton, horticulture, and I'll recall other livestock also. There is now also a command presidential scheme, which His Excellency and the government are going to unfold, where they would provide 1 million kg of tick grease for distribution to 1 million rural households at 1 kg per household, so that our goats and our sheep and our livestock will not die of the January disease. And we want to applaud government for coming up with this innovation and also with this policy. And also we hope that they can do the distribution before the January when the tick-borne disease is at its highest. Lastly, just to say that I'm taking this platform to advise that the DCC elections vetting of candidates, that process is almost complete. It's almost complete. We now just await the final list to be submitted to the Politburo. That is the final list of those who have been approved and who have been considered to qualify according to the criteria set out in the circular of the political commissar. There was some delay because those who were considered not qualifying made appeals, and those appeals were cascaded back to the provinces for discussion and comments. Now, in the light of those comments, this Department of Security will take into account those comments and come up now with a final list which decides which candidates are going to run for the DCC elections. Like I've said before, this is an organ we introduced through our Goromons conference in December last year to serve as a coordinating organ to coordinate party districts in each administrative district, so that there's greater efficiency and also that we pursue the president's passion for economic development. We will be able to pursue it more vigorously when we've got this organ, which will call upon it to work closely with the government structures. As you are aware, the government thrust now is development, which is why the former district administrators are now called district development coordinators. The former provincial administrators are now called provincial development coordinators. The emphasis is on economic development, and that is what we are going to introduce, and we hope that once the final list of candidates is approved, we should be able to determine when the elections can take place. The sooner, of course, the better for all of us, and we can put these elections with all the headaches that accompany any contestation for power. We can put all these headaches behind us. Finally, this is a warning to newspapers. In this particular case, to Newsday. I trust that they are here. We are asking that they recant their headline story where they alleged falsely that Tarirai David Mnangagwa, whatever is done, whoever is a biological son of the president. We are demanding, Zanu-Pf is demanding from Newsday an unconditional apology and a retraction of that story. We expect newspapers to honor their ethics, and ethics demand that you give the facts as they are. You investigate. Why do you rush to a newspaper to allege and infer that someone is a biological son when in fact that is not so? Why do you not take time to investigate? But also, I don't like this tendency that I should be guilty by association. You all have relatives. Why should you, if they commit any crimes, why should you be made to feel guilty because of crimes that they may have perpetrated? Again, it sells you newspapers, but it's not ethical. Give the story as is. If this Tarirai David Mnangagwa committed anything that he did in the mining sector, report it, investigate and report it without any association to anybody. When you associate it to anybody, what are you implying? That the president is behind the gold mine grab. In other words, that he is the one who sent Tarirai to do it. Therefore, that the president is corrupt. So I'm warning Newsday that you do not repeat this. But for now, I'm demanding an unconditional apology and retraction of that story. And the apology and the retraction should come on the same page that this article appeared. If it was front page, let it also be front page, so that it merits equal attention, which you wanted the original article to attract. Those are my comments for today. I now invite you to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Comrade Spokesperson. I think the groundwork has been laid. Comrade Spokesperson, I think our colleagues, you also bear with us. This should be the last time we should be discussing about media ethics with you. We expect that this is your profession and you must do it diligently. We do our work diligently. We allow you in so that we exchange, we share ideas, we give you the platform to seek for clarifications. You do. But honestly, this victory you're targeting the first family is becoming an embarrassment. And an embarrassment on the person doing that. Or in the media was doing that as well.
And where I don't understand, to be honest, because the editorial policies of newspapers is determined by its owners. And in this particular case, we know Trevor Ngube is a shareholder in Newsday. But the embarrassment that we have here, or that I have, is where Trevor Ngube is a presidential advisor and owner of Newsday, and he cannot marry his obligations as a special advisor to the president and the editorial policy of his newspapers to attack unfairly someone he advises. I don't understand. Maybe I should seek a meeting with him to understand what is going on, to understand what basically it means for a shareholder who is an advisor to the president to entertain an editorial policy which relentlessly, falsely attacks the president and the first family. Falsely.
In other words, even the common spokesperson is saying that convenience which he has as a special advisor to the president even gives him the privilege to inquire from the president whether this was his biological son or not. But for the sake of wanting to make a very big, very bold headline, you just go about lying. This is a blue line. In honest lying, honestly, what's the purpose of being here? Concern, what's the purpose of being here? When we go about lying, you guys, we think you do peer review. We as politicians, even we those from the opposition, we even exchange some ideas. We even exchange issues. But honestly,
Besides that, a lot of you do phone me to inquire about the party, about the president. And almost invariably, when I don't have the answer, I always say, I come back to you. And that platform you have, you could have come to me and phoned me before reporting, before publishing, to say, Acting Secretary for Information, there is this story. Is Tarira a biological son of the president? And I would have followed the president to inquire and give you the true story. And then you could have gone ahead and reported the true story. But you are not interested. You are not interested in the truth. That is the conclusion that I reach. You are not interested in the truth. Now, nations cannot be built. Nation building cannot be successful on untruths and falsehoods. You cannot build nations based on falsehoods.
Thank you very much, Comrade Spokesperson, for that clarification. As we open the platform for questions, please let us understand that the leadership is here to give you time to clarify on any issue that you do have before you go on and make those headlines. In any case, this case, it's just a business misunderstanding which should be dealt with for its own merits without deciding whether this one is son of this or was alleged to be son of this. This is an issue that should be dealt with by the courts as it is there. But somebody always want to try to fix it, to fit in the name of the president to it so that it makes a selling headline. This is yellow journalism, it's gutter. It is not something that we should be celebrating. I think let's, do strong peer review, ask ourselves whether we are not harming some people unnecessarily and
So
unfairly.
at the end of the day, it may not even be a grab. It's a civil matter. Perhaps that's what newspapers should do and investigate. Is it a gold grab, a claim grab? Is it a civil dispute? And what are the issues? And tell us what the issues are. What is Tarira is saying? What are those who feel they've been cheated or affected? What are they saying? That's what newspapers should do. Give both sides of the story.
Thank you very much, Chef. Perfect. Your heart is burning. Perfect, Tonga. Kolisan.
They have not said anything. It means nothing has changed on Kaya, but I'm still acting spokesperson. When there anything will know.
Oh,
So
come
sorry,
close. Kolisan.
I missed something.
So the tanks are when you didn't see the people who didn't see Zanu-Pf processes of transition.
I think I want this to be a separate press conference next week.
But we'll tackle it here.
That's a very wonderful.
Let me take the last one first. You
It was
know,
not honest.
you,
Talking about Tigers alone.
you know, is what you saw in November, either you have selective memory or selective sight. If you know what, this was a people's movement. I'm sure you went, you went to Highfield.
Yeah, I saw you.
You were there.
Yeah, he was there. Even in the streets.
Certainly, those mass of people were not tanks. I'm sure you know. What I want you to understand is that don't give too much accent to the military aspect. What I think is very clear with the November 2017 was a people's movement which was opposed to the usurpation of power by the former First Lady, unconstitutionally, illegally, taking advantage of the advancement in age of the former president. And she was not acting alone, as you know. She was acting in cahoots with the G40 elements, who are now some of them in exile, who had decided to usurp constitutional power of the former president and were taking decisions in order to rule this country. That the people said no, an emphatic no. So when you emphasize the tanks and so on, you are on the wrong side of interpretation. Maybe you are not a historian, we forgive you. But as to your more substantive question, I think, let me give you next press conference. I want to devote on this issue, entirely on this issue. Thank you very much for raising it. The challenges, the achievements, that I will do a thorough work, which I'd already started, and I was intending to do it, but it's not quite complete yet, and I'll be able to dish it out to you. What's and all. As of now, I think that some of the achievements are self-evident. The construction of the Bide Bridge, Harare Road, Bide Bridge, Shirundu, the power stations, the Funduza programs. But in the construction of the Harare Bide Bridge, I want to emphasize this. Whereas in the past, we looked forward the power stations, the Funduza programs. But in the construction of the Harare Bide Bridge, I want to emphasize this. Whereas in the past, we looked forward to resources, certainly up to Beatrice, some 20 or so Ks from Beatrice going the chief way. And I was quite impressed with what has already been done. And that is the way to go. And I want to take this opportunity to say also that whereas Marua Nyati was constructed by a Chinese, we commission, where we engage foreign contractors. I would want to see, as we go forward and urge government to develop local capacity to build dams, unless it is beyond the capacity of the locals. Marua Nyati, in fact, I was pleasantly happy to learn that one of the subcontractors is Chief Makumbe, who was there wearing his badge. He's an engineer, I think electrical engineer. He was one of the subcontractors. Now, the expertise, if there is one thing that Zanu-Pf is very happy about, is the development of human capital in Zimbabwe, in all spheres, in all sectors, engineers, medical, and so forth. It is time now that we tap into that expertise, into that human capital. And if we do successfully, it will basically stop the emigration or the migration that we see of our human capital going to enrich already developed countries, United States, UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and so forth. That is the way we should go to stem the exodus of our human capital to foreign lands. And we can only do it if, for instance, we employ our engineers like we are doing on the Harare, Chirundu, and on all roads that we want to construct. The question from Perfect. It's a perfect question. On election observers, I express the view of Zanu-Pf. But that view, as you know, the invitation of election observers is not a Zanu-Pf Zimbabwean requirement alone. It's now a SADC and AU requirement. And what Zanu-Pf was merely observing was that African Union, SADC, COMESA, please wake up, grow up, be independent. Don't allow outsiders to come and adjudicate over your processes, whether there are reforms, whether they are economic. Feel confident of the development path that we are charting. Don't allow outsiders to dictate to you what fairness and freeness is about. Let it be an internal matter and you develop your own development path. As long as outsiders are involved, we will never grow up. We must learn from our mistakes if we make any and forge ahead. Now, when they come and they condemn everything we are doing, it undermines our confidence as a people. That's basically what it is all about, to bring into you an inferiority complex. And once you are feeling inferior, there is nothing you can do to develop this country. Because you always constantly go and ask, what do I do? What do I do? It's like a person seeking to remain perpetually a child. So the point I want to make here is that it's not just a Zimbabwean issue. It's a continental and a sub-regional issue. Not just in SADC, but also even in ECOWAS. These are issues that we should discuss at that level, not just at our national level. In fact, if we did it alone, they will descend upon us with a ton of bricks. What we could try to do is to seek to influence at regional and continental level, but that is not an overnight thing. About the schools, because President-elect was the sponsor, like I've mentioned, of the Zidera. What should we expect? To be honest, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot tell what is in the future. But what I hope is that Joe Biden is an intelligent person. I hope and trust that he's intelligent, that the situation which was obtaining as he saw it in 2001 is not the same situation obtaining today. In 2001, his motivation was to stop the land redistribution program. His motivation was to effect regime change, to reverse the land redistribution program. I'm sure the President-elect Joe Biden will know that those objectives have failed totally. No regime change will take place here. No reversal of the land reform program will take place here. If anything, our president is urging us to increase productivity. That is now the focus of the new dispensation. Productivity, productivity, production, production. President-elect should take that into account. He should also take into account that when they impose sanctions on fertilizer companies and banks which were lending to agriculture, it had nothing to do with promotion of human rights. It had nothing to do with electoral or democracy, nothing. It was primarily to cripple and collapse the economy. And though that intention, that purpose has failed. So we are saying to President-elect Joe Biden, the situation in Zimbabwe which is facing you, there are new realities. We have successfully resisted as a people the sanctions that he sponsored in 2001, and we have successfully resisted it and overcome it. Yes, we are not developing at the same pace as we would want if we were free of sanctions. We have had to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. Now, if sanctions were lifted, this country will fly. Because what you see is evidence of us using only resources. There has not been any new money coming into Zimbabwe for the past 20 years. What you see, whether in every area, education, health, is Zimbabwean resources. Can you see the potential of this country if we were to trade freely, to access capital freely with all countries in the world? And besides, what basically hit us most was that Europe was our traditional trading partner. Our machinery was all sourced from Europe. The companies which operated in Zimbabwe were all European multinationals. So when they imposed sanctions, it was like closing the tap. No water would come. They meant to collapse us almost immediately. They failed. So these are the realities that we are asking our Minister of Foreign Affairs to put before the president-elect transitional team to say, let's improve relations. Let bygones be bygones. Let's start a new chapter. Zimbabwe is such a small country that we don't pose a security threat to the United States, a superpower. Those are the realities, and they know it. They regard us as a hostile country. We are not hostile. We don't have, even if we wanted to be hostile, we have no capacity to be hostile against a superpower. It's so evident. You don't need anyone to tell you that we have no capacity to be hostile to the United States, which is all over the world anyway, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria. You know, we are not even, like I pointed out in our last press brief, what is happening in Mozambique. If we did not have the restraints placed on us economically by sanctions, that would be a clear case where Zimbabwe should intervene to support Mozambique in resisting the insurgency that is taking place in northern Mozambique. So to say that in that situation, we pose a security threat to the United States, we all get surprised where that is coming from. Marwa Nyati Dam, how much I cannot give you the figure now. To be honest, I cannot give you the figure, but it was all built from all local resources. local resources. You need also to know that Tugwi Mukosi was also built from local resources, from start to finish. Unfortunately, Tugwi Mukosi took so long, but it was built from local resources. The Gwai Shangani, until I left government, it was also being financed locally from local resources. So our capacity is there. And what we now need in the area of water dam construction, we have some 11,000 dams of different sizes. We now need government to urgently expedite an irrigation program to link that water to the field edge of the farmer. That is what will lift agriculture to become the key, which is what should be the key sector in our economy. What has befallen of SK? I'm acting, isn't it? I'm acting, and if there are any developments, you will be informed. I don't know what is motivating that question, whether it is, well, no, they may not like me to be spokesperson. They may want to decide for the party to be a spokesperson. I don't know. But I'm in an acting capacity. As you know, the history was that he was not feeling well. That was the history. But when there are any new developments, you will be informed. No doubt.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think the message coming very, very clear here. On top of what you said, they failed to, regime changes failed, and also separating people from Zanu-Pf has also failed, as you are aware. And they've also failed to separate you from us, isn't it? Any other question before you? Blessed, last one, and today, please allow me to call you Blessed Mshanga from Heart and Soul.
You never know. How do you know? How do you know? How do you know?
No, he refused the last time that.
Well, the newspaper.
He said the newspaper.
It may not be here.
It may not be representative of his views and how he writes things diligently and correctly. So he doesn't want to be associated with what is not written.
I said I want to be associated with other institutions, but I didn't want to mislead them.
Representative of his views and how he writes things diligently and correctly. So he doesn't want to be associated with what is not written.
I said I want to be associated with other institutions, but I didn't want to mislead them.
Views and how he writes things diligently and correctly. So he doesn't want to be associated with what is not written.
I said I want to